I quote, "Recent trends reveal that games are becoming increasingly important to the younger generation. Evidence also suggests that students have a positive attitude towards a commercial game to practice higher order graduate skills, such as problem solving, communication, and resourcefulness. This general positive attitude for technology provides educators with an opportunity to leverage students' interest by creating appealing learning experiences through games. As educators, it is crucial that we consider the value of games in order to respond to these generational and technological trends." Welcome to this conversation where we are talking about game-based learning. That was a quote from the article published in Edge's web journal, Engaging with Purpose, Game-Based Learning. And I have the co-authors here with me today, Wesley Anderson and Brendan Ward. Welcome, guys. Good to have you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so I'm just going to introduce you. So let's start with you, Wes. Wes is a passionate writer, reader, and creative. He is a senior content developer at Edge and editorial board member, and he's been with Edge for 5 years. He has a Master of Arts in English Language and Literature from UCT. He creates content in humanities, business, and management. And in his personal time, he explores philosophy, writes fiction, plays games, clearly, and photographs nature. Welcome, Wes. Good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great. And then let's move on to Brendan. Brendan is a skilled and adaptable writer, instructional designer, and editor with an eye for detail and a flair for words. He is also a senior content developer at Edge and has been with us for 4 years. He has a Master of Arts in English Literature from Rhodes University. His experience as a content developer and instructional designer has covered a broad range of academic disciplines from media studies to business management, and he has worked as a teacher of English as a foreign language at Neuralink English Academy and has an academic background as a tutor. He is an experienced writer for online readership, and who knew this? Brendan and I certainly didn't, but has spent time writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as well. So we might be calling on that at some point in the future. And you've also published in Short Story Day, Africa's 2015 anthology, Terra Incognita. So welcome to you, Brendan. Good to have you both
Thank you
here.
very much.
Before we jump into the structure of this conversation, I thought we could just start off with asking you a question: is what made you do research, both of you, into this particular field?
I think Brendan and I are both avid gamers. We've played games pretty much our whole lives, some more competitively, some more recreationally. We like collaborative games. And we wanted to think about how games could be used a bit more in education because it is such a ubiquitous part of life, especially for the youth. And people like playing games. We do education. We thought it would be a good fit.
A perfect match. Yeah. And you, Brendan?
As Wes said, and then also with my background as a TEFL teacher, a lot of our teaching experience, we were teaching kids who'd been at school all day and then coming for extra lessons. Quite boring, quite tiring. And so we were encouraged to spice up the classroom experience with games, but games that were tailored to teaching, to whatever language the students needed to learn. And so we got sort of talking about that as, in essence, a form of quite low-tech at times, game-based learning.
Well, that article I thought it was great. I thought you took a hell of a lot of information and you condensed it into a very concise and succinct article, and I really enjoyed reading it. So we're going to break down the biggest identifier here, which is the difference between gamification and game-based learning, and that's obviously what the article largely deals with, a big part of it. And then looking at the different elements of gamification and then game-based learning.
These terms are often confused, that gamification sounds like you're making a game out of something. But it is different to game-based learning. And there are some key differences in what they try to achieve for the people going through that experience.
They're not mutually exclusive.
No. Yes, also important to note, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have them both at the same time. Yes. In fact, it's very beneficial to have both at the same time. We'll look at the main components that they try to bring to the table.
Yes.
So gamification is the practice of adding game elements to a non-game context. So for example, reading a textbook, adding a leaderboard, adding badges for completing a section or a textbook, that's a way of adding something to a context that is not a game. Reading the textbook doesn't have rules, it doesn't have any of the game mechanics that you would associate with play or with a game. Whereas game-based learning is where you are designing an interactive learning activity. And in that, the game is what is teaching you the content. The game is the method or the mode of instruction rather than a support structure. And so for example, a role-playing scenario puts you in the position of somebody making decisions rather than simply asking, select the correct method to deal with this situation. You would put them in the situation and say, how would you deal with this? And they would have to think about it.
Okay, that's for me. We kind of summarized that as the gamification is quite simply just bringing elements to an otherwise different form of instruction or content, whereas game-based learning, the content delivery is the game. It is a game as opposed to game-based elements.
So we've identified sort of 5 areas where there seem to be different intentions, where gamification is achieving one thing, game-based learning is achieving another. Again, not mutually exclusive. Games can be gamified. Gamification can be used to support games. They can work together, but these are just some differences that'll help us tell them apart.
Okay.
So firstly, gamification adds a game element to a learning environment, whereas the game-based learning presents the learning content in the form of a game. It's tied to the game itself. Gamification will track your progress, provide you with awards and badges, whereas the game-based learning uses the mechanics of the game itself. Learning how to play the game is learning the content.
Here's a good one to just highlight that mutual exclusivity notion, in that game-based learning doesn't not deploy progress tracking, for argument's sake, providing awards and badges, but it's just what's on the table and where the focus is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the next thing is that gamification predominantly is promoting motivation and engagement. As an external structure, it helps you to see where you are in your learning journey. It helps you to contextualize where it is you are. But game-based learning puts you in the position where you have to use critical thinking, you have to problem solve, and you have to get engaged with the content in a different way. It changes the way you interact with the content. Then the next thing is that gamification is geared toward improving the learning outcomes. So getting students to complete their learning journey, motivating them to come back. I think Bren's used the example of Duolingo. When you have a streak, you want to keep that streak going, and it'll remind you. You might not keep your streak if you miss today, and you'll come back and it'll improve your learning journey because you'll want to be there.
It's tapping into your neurotransmitters.
Yes, it's that
addiction,
dopamine
exactly.
coming back every time.
Exactly.
And outside of the learning environments, another one is something like Strava, the running app,
Yeah.
where you can compare your routes or your
100%.
times to other people, and it adds a little bit of competition, a little bit of reason to push yourself a bit more.
I was at a presentation last night where somebody was presenting a speech about their children playing League of Legends. And how, and looking at the different skins in the game and looking at, the different elements of it. But her biggest take home, the message that she was bringing is, her boys aren't particularly interested too much in their regular sort of schoolwork, but what they've learned from a problem-solving, critical thinking perspective in that game was remarkable. And that was the whole message that she was bringing across.
That definitely echoes what we found as well, that younger people are increasingly playing games as just a method of keeping themselves interested, busy, and we could leverage that. We could appeal to that tendency.
All right, so what's next there?
We have one more principle, which is that gamification is relatively low cost when compared to building a game. There are kind of standardized tools. Making a leaderboard is something that doesn't require you to make a unique solution for every different type of learning experience, and they already exist. So you could purchase or you could find a complete tool already. Whereas game-based learning it's for every context, you need to make a new experience.
Yeah.
It's not something you can just sort of cookie cutter take out. Here's a game about economics. We could make it about social development. It has to be built specifically with the learning outcomes in mind. So it takes longer, it's more expensive, but it could be worth it.
We've said before, it's not a one or the other scenario. You know, you can use both in designing and delivering your learning experience, and certain learning outcomes will be more appropriate for one or the other.
100%, yeah. So now that we've looked at some of the principles of gamification and game-based learning, the greatest benefits of gamification are that they provide that structure for the learners that allow them to see where they're going, to become more motivated, and to come back and complete that learning journey.
Within the context of an existing learning journey. So it's putting those elements that are increasing motivation and hopefully ultimately engagement into that existing methodology, I suppose.
Yeah, for example, if you're busy doing a course book and you see that you're 75% complete in terms of reading and doing the activities, you're nearly done, you're motivated, okay, I could do this. You can see where you are. Also, if you see maybe you're 50% along, but it's already the third term, you need to speed things up a bit. It allows you to reflect on that journey and help yourself.
And see where your friends are.
Yeah, definitely. You can compare notes. You can say, oh, I'm already 80% done, and you could,
Okay.
And then game-based learning's greatest benefit is in providing that element of fun, engaging more deeply with the content because you're in it rather than just having a structure put on your textbook. And it also develops critical thinking skills. You have to reason your way through the rules of the game to get what you want, to achieve the outcome.
Okay. It's almost a form of immersive learning, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, you're immersed in a world or an environment, you know?
Absolutely. I like the way you put that, because that is, game-based learning is very interested, and they call it a learning environment, because that's it. You provide a space that steps outside of just conventional learning into a place where you are experimenting, exploring, trying new things.
100%. And that ties into inquiry and into the community of inquiry. You're discovering.
Absolutely.
But I think we'll touch on that a bit later.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And just a reminder, the concepts are not in competition with one another, even though we had the verses.
Caveats, note to self.
It's you put them together and you get an even better experience.
100%.
So as we were just talking about, a game world, and this doesn't have to be a video game, it doesn't have to be a virtual world. In some ways we can think of a sports field as a learning environment, a game world learning environment, or team building exercise can also be a learning environment, because the game needs you to understand the skills, to understand the rules, to understand the strategies that you'll use to achieve your goals, and you'll learn that as you play, as you work within that environment. And so what game-based learning is doing is going, well, if you're already learning a system, learning rules, can we tie the content to that and then achieve some learning outcomes through the process of play?
Okay.
And what we're going to look at is 12 principles that have been extracted from studies on MMOs, massively multiplayer online games. That's things like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, where they bring people from all over the world together. And they can be incredibly complex games with lots of systems and lots of roles, and you have to collaborate with other players. So we read some research that looked at how do these games teach these systems, and how can we use that and tie that to how we learn in a constructivist way.
Cool. Perfect.
So let's dig into these a little bit. There are, I'm going to try and make these as approachable as possible. The probing principle is about testing ideas, experimenting. What happens if? Is this right? So when you're presented in the game, is it the right thing to do to play in this way? What happens if I try that? And that's very much what we want students to be doing with learning content. We want them to probe, build hypotheses, and test them. And this sort of connects to the distributed principle. And the distributed principle also should feel a bit familiar from social learning theory. You're learning from the mechanics and systems of the game as you interact. You'll also be learning from your teachers. You might be learning from other players, asking for help, asking for guidance. If you're playing a game online, there might be a forum or a strategy guide that you engage in. All of those are different channels to learn about the content. And then there should be multiple routes in the game. Again, not always. None of these are an always or a must-have, but they're tools in a toolbox. So if a game gives you branching paths or different strategies, different ways of interacting, going back to the talk that you listened to about League of Legends, that's a great example. There are different characters you can choose and different ways you can approach this to achieve your goals, and you have to learn which one is best.
100%.
And then the practice principle, to try and try again, and that's a big part of our interaction design, to try different approaches, to work on your skills and to track your progress.
Okay.
This one has a long name, but the psychosocial moratorium principle is about having a safety net. Yes. I mentioned that earlier. A safe place to try and fail and learn free of consequences, whether that's playing a management simulation game or working in our interactions. We're not going to fail the students if they try something different and it doesn't work out. And in fact, they can learn from the fact that it didn't work out.
Learning through failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that connects as well to the idea of scaffolding. The regime of competence principle is about scaffolding and that sort of intrinsic reward of pushing yourself that little bit further outside of your comfort zone and then attaining something new.
I liked how those two tie together.
Yes, they do.
The competence principle and the psychosocial moratorium principle.
Absolutely. You need to feel safe to take the risk and push yourself out of your comfort zone. And ideally, in interacting in this virtual environment, you're going to get a chance to understand your own competencies a little bit, and that's the self-knowledge principle. You learn what you do know. So even if that's just a fairly straightforward application or demonstration interaction, by the time you've got to the end of it, you might understand what you now know about the content a little better, or maybe what you still need to revise, still need to know.
All of these principles, that we could jot these down as a list for life skills in a way, because how's that different to your daily life? So it's quite interesting, one environment into another.
Yes. And then connecting nicely with that, this is another one that connects to our daily life, is the collective knowledge principle. This is the community of inquiry and practice. Socializing with other players, whether that's, again, as part of your MMO guild or within a classroom environment or in our, the common space that we're developing, as you talk about what you did, how you played, maybe where you went wrong or where you struggled, you learn strategies, you learn approaches, you learn new ideas.
Great.
Nearly there. The engaging principle, now this is really at the heart of it, is games create, as I said, a new environment. It's something novel. It lets you role play outside of your everyday life. It's not every day you can strap on a shield and fight a dragon. It's not every day that you get to prevent people from coming through South African customs. And so it puts you into a new way of thinking. And that generally seems to be engaging. Most people reported finding that to kind of draw them into the content more.
And I just want to link this together. Our Edge's flagship product is the course book. And we know the whole point about the course book is to drive engagement, because there's lots of evidence to suggest that engagement results in success. So game-based learning is a mechanism to drive that engagement inside a coursebook. And that's why we're doing this today, to understand how we can utilize those kind of tools.
Absolutely. This is, as you say, it's a tool that we can use to draw the students in to engage with the work in new ways.
Exactly. And
talking about coursebook and our platform, the platform is an important part in the game-based learning experience, and that's and one part of that is the user interface ease of use.
Yes.
We want the game-based environment to be as accessible as possible. It shouldn't be a frustrating or confusing situation, so that the students can focus on actually doing what they need to do.
Mustn't be an obstruction.
Absolutely. Similarly, they should have the space to ask for help. The on-demand and just-in-time tutorial principle. The game needs to teach the user or the student what they need to do when they need to know it. They know, so that's instructions before doing, easy reminders of what to do, maybe an FAQ section, and then also, I guess, trying not to overload them with too much information too quickly.
100%. That's also tying into inquiry again. You trying to direct them down a particular route of inquiry and then providing that guidance in whichever form at the appropriate time.
Absolutely, I like the way you put that. And then finally, and this again really underscores the similarity or the overlap where game-based learning and gamification speak to each other, is the achievement principle. That's things like marks or scores or trophies or fanfare or achievement unlocked, some kind of reward for success, intrinsic and extrinsic. That's what keeps people coming back to try again and again and again.
Do you want to maybe just unpack intrinsic and extrinsic reward?
So the extrinsic reward is I got my achievements or I got my marks. I can show someone it's something outside of yourself. The intrinsic reward is that feeling of satisfaction that you got because you did it. This we mentioned briefly when we were talking about the regime of competence principle, that sense of I can't do this and now I can. Or I couldn't do this and now I can. That is rewarding in and of itself.
Right.
I think there's an element of the purposeful play in having the extrinsic reward be something educational rather than most games being intrinsically rewarding. You enjoy playing them. You get a lot of psychological benefit from playing a game, but the extrinsic reward of being good at League of Legends, unless you're at the top tier, is
and
having fun.
$10 million.
Yeah, so
in that process.
yeah, just like playing any sport, unless you're a top athlete, some of those rewards you could actually, if you made an educational experience of it, you could attain another external or extrinsic value, which is the learning experience.
100%. And play is such an important part of it. And you've got a paragraph in the article about that. And that is a big differentiator between game-based learning and gamification, is that game-based learning is play. Gamification is not play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and we tend to, in the modern world, view play as something that's maybe frivolous or pointless or a diversion. But in fact, as we were describing, every learning environment or every game has an element of a learning environment as you're learning strategies. And human beings have played for as long as we've been around. Animals play. It's actually an important part of our way of interacting with one another, and and can be a powerful tool for interacting with learning content.
100%. And there was that point about focusing on the process rather than focusing on the end goal. A lot of the learning and the knowledge acquisition is in the process of playing the game as opposed to the end. And that almost ties into intrinsic and extrinsic, I suppose, to a certain degree.
Yeah, totally.
And I think the important point to drive home here is that we're constantly looking to drive engagement in coursebook, and we're constantly looking as a business to improve the engagement that interactions bring. So that's really what this is about. Is there any last little just bit of information? So game-based learning, what's the one thing you want to drive home there? I thought maybe along the lines of sort of game-based mechanics, aesthetics, game thinking.
We'll have our interactions have a number of mechanics. That's what you can do.
Yeah.
And that also includes the information that you provide.
Okay.
The way they come together as a system, that's you can call dynamics, or you can just call it a game system. That's easy enough. And then the aesthetics is the presentation. So that's the scenario that you present, maybe the if you want to suggest some icons or sort of a theme. Theme is a nice word to use for that.
So a lot of the tools we use are, they could be used across different types of interactions. So there's the drag and drop. If you have an element that you want them to be able to pick up off the canvas and then drop it somewhere else, you could do that. We have sliders. So let's say you have 5 different points along a timeline. You could drag those along. There is also... What others do we
can have open-ended questions, so that's a text fill, and you can invite the student to enter something, and the system will record it and then display it back to them with some feedback.
I thought I'd just share a little sort of penny drop that we kind of had, or I kind of had, And that in the article, you kind of trying to differentiate gamification versus game-based learning. And it's not a versus scenario. Gamification is a subset of game-based learning. So all of the features, if you will, all of the concepts of gamification are the same for game-based learning. And Brendan, you think of it as a spectrum. You want to just maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so you could sort of think of it as a spectrum of game-likeness.
Okay.
That's a very clumsy word, and if I were to ever unpack this further, but yes. So the less game-like is where gamification sits, generally speaking. So it's small elements of game-likeness, of gaming, of an achievement or a score or a progress tracker, but it's not a deep sort of level of integration with the entire game system. And then you can move further to some of our interactions are more game-like. So it's not just, some sort of tracking your progress or getting a grade at the end, but you're sort of interacting directly with certain mechanics within this the interaction environment. And then some are much more game-like, like the ones that we shared with everyone to try out. Those are the ones that are essentially games. And so that's very much a way you can think of it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that was a penny drop for me, for sure. I don't know about you guys, but for me, this has been a very, very interesting discussion. Undoubtedly, gaming is a preoccupation of the youth and is a mechanism for engagement. Our job as educational content creators is to make content that is engaging and that can be deployed in our coursebook platform to ultimately drive student success. Wes and Brennan, thanks very much. Very, very insightful. Big learning experience for everybody, I think. And it's been really, really great to have your contributions in the session. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Good. Chat soon. Cheers.